Okay, so get ready to jump into a world that feels like it's straight out of a spy novel, you know. We're talking about the Steele dossier, Russian interference, the whole nine yards.
And though it may sound like a movie, this deep dive um, looks at real-world events, investigations, trials. It's been all over the news.
Yeah, we're going deep on this one. Think international intrigue, possible risks to national security, and, this whole idea that U.S. elections are vulnerable. We're going to be talking about Christopher Steele, former British spy who really shook things up with his dossier.
And it's important to remember, right off the bat, Steele wasn't like some random blogger. He was MI6, deeply familiar with Russia, even ran their Russia desk for a while.
Okay, so this guy knew his stuff when it came to Russia, but what did he actually find? What's the Steele dossier all about?
So back in 2016, a firm, Fusion GPS, got hired to, dig up dirt on Trump's Russia connections,
Like opposition research, that sort of thing.
basically.
Mm-hmm.
And they brought Steele in for his expertise. He had connections, knew how Russia worked, so he puts together these reports, raw intel, and that became the Steele dossier. And let me tell you, this thing made some wild claims.
Like what? Give me the headlines.
The big one: Russia messed with the 2016 election to get Trump elected. Not just, like, messing around, but a whole plan to tip the scale.
Whoa, hold on. If that's true, it means like a foreign country messed with a U.S. election. That's crazy.
Exactly, and it sent shockwaves everywhere. But wait, there's more. Steele also said that Russia might have compromising stuff on Trump.
Like blackmail material.
Yeah, things they could use to get him to do what they wanted if he became president.
Okay, so imagine a foreign power having that kind of leverage over the U.S. president. Talk about a thriller. This is where the whole P-tape thing comes in, right?
Yeah, that was in there, but it's just one part of a much bigger picture,
Mm-hmm.
The allegations of, blackmail and election interference were way more important.
Right. The P-tape, if it's even real, is one thing, but the idea that they could control him, that's terrifying. So this dossier gets out there. What happens? Does the world explode?
Kinda. BuzzFeed News got it and published it online in January of 2017. And, well, things blew up. Steele, being ex-spy and all, basically went into hiding from the media.
Wow. Okay, so Steele blows the whistle, then has to disappear. What about Trump? What did he say about all this?
Trump denied it all, called it fake news, a hoax, said it was his enemies out to get him, even sued Steele.
Wow. Okay, so we've got this back and forth, and the U.S. presidency is on the line. It's no wonder everyone was glued to this, trying to figure out the truth.
And that's where things get interesting. This whole Steele dossier thing, it became a huge point of, political division.
So it wasn't even about the truth anymore. It was just a political weapon.
Exactly. But before we get too far into that, let's talk about Steele's side. What was he thinking? Why do this?
Right, he was retired from the spy game, right? What made him take such a risk?
Well, Steele actually talks about this. He wrote a book, Unredacted. And he's done interviews, like one with Salon Talks. Really interesting stuff.
Okay, so tell me, what's his story?
Steele says he had to report what he found. He saw it as a threat to U.S. national security, like, hey, this is serious, I have to say something.
So not just a job, but like a real concern.
Exactly. And he's very clear that this spy stuff, it's not always clear-cut. You've got, like, incomplete information, shady sources, you got to interpret things. He saw his job as giving his best assessment, not necessarily proving everything 100%.
More of a warning than hard evidence, then.
Yeah, good way to put it. He even admits some of it, especially the more, the wilder stuff, couldn't be totally verified.
Which makes sense. We are talking about spies, after all.
Right, and Steele himself has said even the best intelligence is maybe 70% accurate. That's just how it is.
So what's the verdict? Is the Steele dossier legit or not?
$1 million question, right? Some of it checks out, some is still up in the air. Some people say is wrong.
It's complicated.
Yeah, really complicated. And you can see how something like this could be, twisted for political reasons, true or not.
Oh, for sure. And that's something Steele has talked about, how he's worried it wasn't taken seriously enough. Like, even if I'm partly wrong, you got to investigate this.
Right. You'd think they'd want to get to the bottom of it one way or another.
You would, but it feels like people are more interested in using it for their own side.
And the truth gets lost in the noise. It's interesting, though, that Steele seems most upset about the lack of a real investigation.
Yeah, like he's saying, this is serious stuff, guys. And get this, he claims to have found even more information since then.
Wait, what? There's more. More about Russian interference.
That's what he says. In his book, he hints at finding new stuff, not just about 2016, but maybe the 2020 election, too.
Hold on. He's saying they kept doing it. after Trump was elected.
That's his claim. And he says they were involved in some pretty big plans to try to help Trump. Plans? Like what? Don't leave me hanging. What kind of plans are we talking about? Well, he's a little vague on the specifics, and, this is just Steele's word, but he seems to be saying Russia was trying different things to help Trump in 2020.
One thing he mentions is possible cooperation between Russia, Venezuela, and Iran.
Okay, now that's an interesting mix. What's the supposed link there?
Steele thinks they are working together, maybe trying to, mess with oil prices, make the border situation look worse.
So he's saying Russia was trying to create a situation where Trump could look good to his supporters on those issues.
Could be. He also mentions using social media to make these issues a bigger deal, cause division in the U.S.
Which, we've seen that before, right?
Yeah.
Social media can be powerful, but getting other countries involved, that's a whole new level.
Definitely makes things more complicated. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, maybe we should step back for a second.
Good idea. Big picture time. What does all this mean?
Well, this whole thing, Steele, the dossier, it all highlights some big issues. For one, how vulnerable are democracies, really?
Yeah.
It's scary to think a foreign country could influence elections, even here in the U.S.
It's like, how do you even protect against that, It's invisible.
Exactly. Makes you wonder about our institutions, intelligence agencies, how to fight fake news, the whole thing. And then there's the political side. That dossier, it got so divisive so fast.
Yeah, nobody was even trying to be objective, just pushing their own agenda.
Right. But let's not forget about motives here. Why would Trump, even if some of the dossier was wrong, why not criticize Putin, really investigate this stuff?
That's the question. Any theories out there?
Well, a lot of people have talked about how much Trump seems to admire Putin's style. Putin's a strongman, very authoritarian.
So maybe Trump wasn't taking orders from Putin, but he liked how Putin did things.
Possible. And remember, this wasn't just a U.S. thing. The whole world was watching, and they were nervous.
Yeah, Trump wasn't exactly known for being Mr. International Cooperation.
Not really. Questioned NATO, threatened trade wars, pulled out of the climate agreement.
So basically the world was holding its breath, hoping the U.S. wouldn't fall apart.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the Steele dossier just made things worse. People were worried about what a Trump presidency would mean for alliances, for trade, for security, you name it.
Wow. It's amazing how one document could cause so much trouble.
It is.
Yeah.
And it speaks to this bigger issue we're dealing with. No one trusts institutions anymore. Fake news is everywhere. And it's almost impossible to know what's true in this crazy political landscape.
It's like we're in this funhouse mirror world, but that's why we do this deep dive, right? Trying to make sense of it all.
Exactly. And this deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about.
For sure. Okay, so let's recap. What are the key takeaways from all of this?
First, the Steele dossier. Even if it's controversial, it made everyone pay attention to this whole foreign interference thing.
And say what you want about Steele, but the guy was a spy. He knew what he was talking about, or at least he thought he did.
Second, yeah, some of the dossier is shaky, but other parts, especially about Russia in 2016, that's backed up by other stuff.
Third, this whole situation, it shows how fragile democracies can be. And it's really hard to balance national security with individual rights,
And last but not least, the Steele dossier is a perfect example of how information, especially in the wrong hands, can be twisted and used as a weapon.
And how hard it can be to get to the truth, even when it really, really matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk about a tangled web. It's kind of crazy to think this all goes back to, one guy, a former spy, and a document nobody had even heard of a few years ago.
It's definitely a wild ride, lots of twists and turns, no easy answers. But that's how it usually is with intelligence, global politics, all that.
It's like they say, truth is stranger than fiction. But in this case, we might never even know the full truth.
True, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. In the meantime, I think the best we can do is, learn from it all, be aware, recognize what's going on, and really think about the information we're getting.
Well said. Before we wrap this up, anything else that really stands out to you about this whole Steele dossier thing?
For me, it just goes to show intelligence work, it's not black and white. It's not about having all the answers, but looking at risks, different sides of the story, and connecting those dots, even when they're faint.
It's about asking the tough questions, even if you won't like the answers.
Exactly.
Makes you think, though, how safe are our systems really? And how do we protect something as important as our elections from this kind of stuff?
It's a question we keep coming back to, right? And there are no simple answers. But I think it starts with, just being aware, understanding how they do it, recognizing disinformation, really thinking critically about what we see and hear.
So much of this is hidden, though. It's like we have to trust that someone's out there protecting us, but we don't know who or how.
That's the nature of intelligence, yeah. A lot of it happens in the shadows. But that doesn't mean we can't ask hard questions, hold our leaders accountable, demand some transparency.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about. We've gone from spies to international conspiracies right to the heart of our democracy. It's bigger than just the Steele dossier, isn't it? It's about the future of our democracy, the kind of world we want, one where truth matters and we all have the power to find it. We've given you the main points, the unanswered questions, different perspectives. Now it's up to you. What do you believe? What will you do with this information? How will you keep this conversation going?